Good morning. It is my great pleasure being with you today. This is my first time being in Pakistan, so the main main idea will be just to share the experience of specifically Georgia. But if you during the conversation there will be some questions about general ideas about the philosophy of reform or philosophy of tax policy and administration, and that would be like a broader discussion. That would be, of course, very important and pleasure to me. So, as far as I understand, there is the break at 11. So my presentation will be just, I'll try to make it as short as possible. I will just, go slide by slide as fast as possible. And then if you have some specific questions, we will just, go deeper into this one or another particular issue. So a little bit giving you just a small introduction about myself. I used to be Minister of Finance for 3 years. Before that, I was Minister of Economy around a year in Georgia. I've never been a political party guy, but more a technocrat working on policy making, policy elaboration. And my background comes from all economic policy all the time. I used to work there. I studied in this subject. I graduated from Duke University, specifically public finance management. So, and that was like some kind of room of opportunity when some new young generation came into power, and just we had some brilliant chance to pursue these reforms that I will be talking about. So before we start, I will just go a little bit about background about the country and then the profile of the country. Okay, so that's some numbers about Georgia. Georgia is a small country. This is a part of former Soviet Union. Country itself is around 4 million population. And these are just general numbers. Nominal GDP per capita right now is around 8,000. Real GDP growth last year was 7.5. Unemployment rate is quite high still. Inflation is manageable and targeted. And there are some information about these ongoing import-export partners. And main partners, we still keep this with the CIS, like former Soviet Union countries, and then European Union is one of the partner, and China, as you can find out as other countries are doing as well. So going to the next slide, I will just show why Georgia was being considered as a successful one for these economic reforms. And that's really very important, because when there is the demand to listen to the story of Georgia, the question is why? What has happened there? And this particular chart also shows what was the main reason for it. Let me just briefly describe it. So after collapse of Soviet Union, during Soviet Union, Georgia being considered like a not too rich, not too poor, somewhere in the middle, with some industrial capacity. Mainly agriculture is being considered. And then after collapse of Soviet Union, we entered into the serious, tragic events right away, the civil unrest and many difficulties related to politics. And then you see that huge drop of the economy. This is like a whole tragedy. After the Second World War, Germany was much better than Georgia after the collapse of Soviet Union in terms of the economy. And you see this as the reduction of the 44% reduction of the economy in one particular year. In total, that was around 80% during 3 consecutive years. So you see this. And then after, there was some kind of, more or less stability in 95, and that shows some positive signal. But, still this GDP growth and GDP is just, on the same side. This is not changing too much. And then after 2003, where these main reforms have started, till 2008, that was like in a period when we just, did some kind of fundamental reforms in many different areas. That was not one particular one. I will talk about that in taxation as well, but it was more like a complex. And then you see so high growth rate right away. You see also like, GDP per capita, GDP nominal terms also like, rising right away. And then there are some like, backdrops on 2009 and 2020, and that was caused by the one with the military conflict with Russia in 2008, and another one was caused by pandemic. But overall, economy was doing well. And then I will also go into this one, and in 3 consecutive years, in 2004 to 2008, the growth rate was more than 9%. And even now, the growth rate is really very high. So next slide shows, let me go to slide by slide. That also shows like, the same trend, but that's GDP per capita. And this yellow line is Georgia. And then you see that, Georgia standing in 1992 together with other countries, somewhere on the quite low level. And then you see in 2024, so like, high speed growth rate. And that's why, considering Georgia as the successful one in this regard, also together with other reforms, specifically in doing business area, Georgia being considered number 1 reforming country by World Bank in 2005-2010. So this particular period was also very important. If you see also this is FDI, foreign direct investments, and we all understand that without foreign direct investments, developing of the country, the economy, especially small economy as Georgia was and is now still it is absolutely difficult. And then those reforms that allowed us to not only double and triple FDIs, but you see the difference between 2004 and 2006 and 2007. This is almost like increased by 10 times, and that was really very important element for growth contribution. Again, looking at a little bit about background, because still to refresh ourselves where we are coming from, you see real GDP change, percentage change in years, minus 20%, then minus 45%, minus 25%, still minus 11%, and then that was huge disaster, for the economy. And inflation, you see also because after collapse of Soviet Union, Georgia introduced some kind of quasi-currency that was called coupon, and then this coupon was just as a mean of the change in the currency. But the inflation rate for that one, because the government that time just supplied too much without any economic policy understanding and rational, you see that the inflation was 1,000%, and sometimes that reached some kind of crazy numbers as well. So, and therefore, since 1995, and when the new currency was introduced, and then the stability has been achieved, and then more or less country became kind of the institutions started working, and some new elements being introduced. That was more or less a good signal, but still was not enough to reach economic growth. So economic growth still was a problem with all other elements, together with all other elements. And the most important one was tax to GDP ratio, because we could not collect taxes. And the most important problem was that in 2002, 2003, the problem was the more institutional, more fundamental than we could expect. So the first problem was that there was corruption everywhere. Every field, every area, every sector, every layer was totally corrupted, and that was the serious problem for the society. And even I myself used to work in one of the commission, anti-corruption commission, and we were thinking that maybe this is the culture. Maybe we cannot just overcome this. Maybe we should just accustom to this. This is the life. That's how we should live with that. So, and that was really very devastated. And the 2002, 2003 was also the very important time when, like, the leadership, elite, like people who had some kind of ideas how to change, they had some kind of interaction with each other to make some moves. And the second one was lack of government transparency and credibility. Of course, that is the first signal when there is no trust with the government. Whatever they say, everyone says, okay, come on, this is some kind of game at the end. So, and then absence of unified and coordinated development policy, because one ministry was doing one, another one doing absolutely contradicting to this one, etc. So that was the situation when the government was not acting on a normal way. Budget deficit, of course, that was very important, accumulating debt. Overall, debt was not very high, but the point was that, since we had really very low level of tax to GDP ratio, we could not pay for debt services. And therefore, country was almost bankrupted, somewhere at the edge of the bankruptcy. Tax to GDP revenue to GDP ratio was around 13%, but there was also huge number of areas, huge portion of areas in the budget. It was around 70%. We could not spend for pensions and salaries, and the areas were accumulated every month and every year. So at the end, there was in 2003, new political group came into power, more young generation, having some enthusiasm doing something, having some enthusiasm, not being swamped into corruption, change the country, let's just, do something which will be absolutely different than was before. But how we should start? What is the first step? I mean, where it comes from? What is the first target, and we should go? And then, of course, all these reforms are not just one side. It is not one particular area that you can tackle or you could just address and everything just becomes bright. It is not like this, right? So, and we see that these are just at least 6 in terms of economic reforms, 6 particular areas which we addressed, and we addressed not one by one, but we addressed all together. But of course, with some consistency within each of us, in tax administration and policy, because this is definitely very crucial and important, and free trade, and that was also very important, and I will talk about that more. Budget policy, because of course, you understand that licensing and permits, this is doing business reform for sure, because without that, it is not possible. And privatization and state-owned enterprises, and get rid of these kind of bad assets as much as possible, or inefficient, let me say, in a different way. So, and then monetary policy. And I will touch some general ones, that is the main topic for today's discussion. But if you have some other questions about some other areas, let me also go deeper to this. So we started about taxation. Tax policy and administration is the most important part, because if government doesn't have money, they cannot just do anything. They cannot spend for education, that was already clearly mentioned. Not education, not for healthcare, not for any infrastructure, and therefore, this is absolutely inefficient. Not having the resources for that. And then, okay, we should move towards more active tax policy and administration. But what does it mean? What a good system itself means for particular country, for particular situation. And we had this that clarity right away, saying that has to be easy and simple. That's really very important, because that has to be easy and simple for everyone, for taxpayer, for tax administrator, because sometimes we have a feeling that whatever we decide in the government, tax officer somewhere in the region, he has exactly the same idea or exactly the same knowledge. Not at all. I mean, they are just acting absolutely differently. They have their own knowledges coming not from legislation, but coming from some training that comes from their senior officers. And then this kind of mismatch or gap within this knowledge, it creates a lot of difficulties for taxpayers at the end, right? So at the end, that goes towards the corruption, because if something is absolutely blurry, then absolutely clear interaction will take place. And this clarity on the other side is a so-called shadow economy. And our main point was to make it easy and as simple as possible. We should also reduce rates, like low tax rates, and I will talk about that further. Universality, which means no exemptions. Like, we needed that everyone is under the same rules, and that's really very important. Corruption-free, and corruption-free is also a very important issue, because that means like no tolerance to corruption. I mean, because I understand that societies like us, in Georgia, we had that one. Okay, I mean, if something happens there, that's okay if it is not too much. And no one knows what is this too much. And this is very important to keep this no tolerance to corruption, because otherwise this always damages the overall environment. Then internationally competitive tax environment, because we need to just, compare ourselves to our neighboring countries, so that, the business environment in this particular country has to be much better than other countries if we really want to attract investment. And then, of course, trustworthy cooperation with businesses, because, we need to keep businesses on loop. Like, we need to let them know what is expected, and what is they have to predict their own businesses as much as possible. So this is factors for successful tax system. Like, what helped us at the end to move towards that? Like, first is the political framework, high political support, because if this is not supported by other political players, it is not doable. That was in Georgia. I don't know how in other countries, but I've never seen anything otherwise. For example, if law enforcement institutions are not supporting this policy, that's not doable, because they are very important players in this case, not tax administration, but other more stronger guys who are existing in the country. So, and then that was exactly the case in Georgia. Then another one was policy framework, like taxes, rates, exemptions, priorities. Legal framework, which is like a clarity in the legislation. Institutional framework, like organizational structure, I will talk about that. Human resources, and then hard infrastructure, of course, like without that it is difficult, like especially at the customs. And then soft infrastructure, which is also very important for risk management. So at the end, what we just achieved is that we adopted new tax code. This is a legislation, we call it tax code. New customs code, the legislation on customs, new budget system law that was also related to fiscal part, and we tried to make it as, again, universal, easy to understand, and simple to implement, and improve collection and administration, business registration with all e-filings and all kind of elements for digital part of it. And then we also introduced dispute resolution mechanisms as efficient as possible, because judiciary is not professional in tax issues, and that's why we decided that better to just have something more efficient mechanisms rather than just put the burden on judiciary. Tax ombudsman that we introduced, that worked for a while, more or less well. Self-compliance, because self-compliance is exactly what creates the proper tax system, and these are just taxes that we just decided to keep. This is like personal income tax, that's corporate income tax, VAT, excise tax, customs duty, and property tax, and all other taxes were just abolished. So let me just show that. So these are these are all these taxes that was before. That was large list. It was also there. We just abolished all of them because we thought that this is absolutely meaningless. There was some tiny, tax on usage of symbolic kind of stuff, or there was some kind of tourism tax, etc., etc. So we decided that's not absolutely relevant. Better to just abolish that, and then keep these major ones. But also the most important one was this personal income tax and social tax, because we had these two taxes. But by nature, they were absolutely the same, because that was tax on personal income coming from the employment or okay, coming from the employment or coming from another, like mainly social tax was the tax on employment. And what we did, since that was like a complicated one, because people always had some kind of confusion, one, and then also there was also the personal income tax was a progressive tax system. So progressive tax system is always kind of, justified as a fair, because like, poor pays less and the rich poor pays more. But in reality, that's not true, because in reality, everyone at the end were paying the same. Because this particular progressiveness is not efficient at the end, but that created a lot of confusion, that created a lot of corruption elements, and therefore what we decided to make it as simple as possible. So at the end, in 2008, we just merged these two taxes and put the flat rate, and this is 25%, was 25 in 2008. And as we were just, also, like, you understand that this process is not just one party game. This is a multi-party game. There is an IMF, they are checking all the time, okay, you are reducing rates, whether you are collecting taxes on a proper way. So, and then as we were showing them that, okay, we are increasing tax to GDP ratio, allowing us to reduce taxes further. So that's why we just, decided, okay, if we reach some certain target by 25% of personal income tax, is it possible to reduce this to 20, but we will just, collect more? They say, okay, let's try. And then we tried, and that worked. And then since that worked, we continued towards that. So that was the process of around like 3-4 years, but that reached target at the end. So we can go back if you have some questions. I will just, continue with that. And then in 2007, we started talking about that. Okay, that's what is the rational ratio of tax to GDP? Like, how do we see it? Like, what should be like a tax, like government size in the economy overall? Because that's really very important fundamental question. How much government has to take out of the economy and spend for their purposes, whatever purposes they are, good or bad, it doesn't matter. What is then this portion in the economy? And then we decided that, okay, that has not to be too much, too high. That has to be somewhere at 30%. And that's why we introduced a constitutional law. This is the part of the constitution saying that only 30% of GDP can be spent for government. And then, of course, the debt has to be under control and deficit has to be under control. This is just, typical fiscal rules that other countries also have. But that also shows the dynamics in this period, right? So, red line is spending, overall spending. Green line is tax to GDP ratio, and then this blue line is capital expenditure to GDP. So you see that in 2002, capital expenditure was almost zero, because we didn't have money and normal purpose. And then in 2008 or 7, that already became around 10% to GDP, and that was already some kind of starting point for the economy to moving forward in terms of investing in infrastructure. That's the structure of tax. Of course, the biggest part comes from value-added tax, and that's absolutely normal for the economy of Georgia. And I will explain a little bit about value-added versus import duties, because what we did also on the other side, in terms of import duties, we just reduced it dramatically as well. So personal income tax is around 31%, then comes corporate income tax, then excise, and other small two taxes like customs tax and property tax. Okay? So personal income tax, as I mentioned, that was the green line is portion to GDP, and red line is tax revenue in percentage. In total taxes. So, and you see this dramatic increase in starting from 2005 around, we introduced that and then increased dramatically. So this is corporate income tax, very interesting one, because that's also showed that initially that being increased because of tax administration, tax collection, we increased really very much. And then in 2007, there was a new decision made, which is really good decision. I supported that decision as well, although I was not in the government, but I was in the consultancy. That time, in 2017, there was a decision, we call it Estonian model. It is not typical Estonian, but we call it like this. But the idea was that this undistributed income of the corporation is not taxed. So only distributed income is taxed by corporate income tax and the dividend tax. So just to understand the point of it is that companies, if they are reinvesting in their businesses, they are not taxed, and that's a really very huge incentive for companies and corporations to reinvest in their own expansion and business development, right? So that's why that was reduced in 2007 and 2008, but that also went back, and of course considering like pandemics and considering issues related to the economy. But also 2002, 2003, you see in the nominal terms that's like doubled or even more, like tripled, which is really very good signal for the economy. Okay, so this is value-added tax. That's more or less clear, like stable. Like what happened is that we have equal VAT on imported and local goods. That's on every goods and every services. High increase in revenues from 2004, 20% was till 2005, and since then 18%. And VAT exemptions were just dramatically also abolished as much as possible on a normal way. Next slide. Excise tax. That's also like we have only 4 products are taxed by excise. Tobacco, alcohol, oil products, and natural gas and vehicles. So no other products are taxed by excise. Like we wanted them to be focused, tax administration to be focused only on those 4 ones, and that's also increased from 1% to GDP to 3% to GDP. International trade. So that's really very important also part, and let me talk about this a little bit. So from 2004, we started thinking about that, like how we can develop the economy itself. Like, okay, FDI is one of the main elements. So how we should attract FDI. And FDI means not just money. The FDI means knowledge. And then bringing the knowledge, but how we can just interact with the rest of the world, like with our main partners. With the limited capacity of industries, we have some kind of stuff, but still we wanted to, like, investing in Georgia, it's not interesting per se, because like global economy is expanding further, it's becoming much diverse. And if someone is investing in Georgia, this investment need to be work outside of Georgia. I mean, market should be much bigger than Georgia itself. And that's why we decided, okay, we need to go to further expansion of our market. And that means free trade agreements with our main partners, first of all. And the free trade agreements, we just, started with Turkey, and then, of course, with the CIS countries, because they were our main partners. We went we targeted, of course, the European Union, and that's our main direction, like, further integration into EU. And then we achieved free trade with China. And, doing this process, that also helped really very much, being like, more active in free trade internally as well. So what we did is that we abolished complicated tax system at the customs, like, customs duties. There were like 30 different rates, which were just, also vary from 0 to 27 or something. And then we decided, okay, we need to just, get rid of it. And we need to put on many of these goods, 0 tax. And then, of course, there were some kind of lobbying from different groups, like, from agriculture and from construction materials, etc. And we still kept some of them on some of these goods, but still average weighted import duty is around 1.5%, which is really very low. So then the question is, okay, if this import duty is too low, how you are collecting taxes at the customs. The most important one is the VAT. So the most important one that we decided intentionally to reduce customs duties so that allowing businesses to put proper invoices at the customs, because what they are doing is that they are refunding their VAT at the end. So this VAT refund mechanism allows us to be like less corrupted at the customs, because customs was always like one of the most corrupted institutions in Georgia. We changed that dramatically, pretty much, because of those particular policy measures and some administrative measures, and I can talk about that, of course, if you have some questions. But what we have achieved at the end, we increased very, very much VAT, but we know we just left aside this customs duty as a main source of revenue. That is not source of revenue. That's a source of protection. But from that viewpoint, we decided not to be protective, because we need more competitive product produced in the country rather than just protecting something from those one. And that's the very important decision that has actually helped us to move towards that. Then another issue is the complicated fiscal institutions. As I mentioned, there were many kind of difficulties between many different institutions, especially at the border. At the border, there were border control. It was like Ministry of Finance, because they had to control customs part, Customs Department, separate one, Ministry of Internal Affairs, Road and Transport Department, Financial Police, Statistics Department. So many people were standing at the border controlling many different things. In many cases, not controlling, but doing their own job. And that's why we decided, okay, it is better to just get rid of this one, just put only one particular institution for customs control and one particular institution for passport control. And that's why that's only that helped us at the end to be more efficient in terms of management of border and other areas. That's a little bit about the structural changes. I will not go deeper. It kind of seems a little bit complicated, but the point here is that we had two ministries in 2004, Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Tax Revenue. And then in 2004, we made decision to put those departments within the Ministry of Finance, just separately, not being under one umbrella. And in 2007, we decided to set up, to create a new agency, which is like a state revenue service. But I would like to pay your attention to this one. That was not just putting those agencies under one umbrella, because that was not helpful. What we did is that we merged these institutions into one, which means we decided to have a service department within the revenue service, administration, which just collects taxes, the audit and inspection, which is a separate unit, and then investigation, which was also a separate unit. So the idea was that not just put tax department and customs department under one umbrella, but merge this into two parts, saying that, okay, there is a tax revenue service hall, only providing services. They are not controlling anything. And then there is a control department working for risks and risk mitigation. And there is audit. They are going and auditing whatever there is, whether this is for customs or whether this is for taxes. Okay? So that particular picture shows this one. The previous one was the local offices with this one, and then we decided to merge this service, administration, and audit further. So I have 5 more minutes, I guess, but I will try to be as quick as possible. So together with the taxes, it's not. Only dealing with taxes, it's not enough, and it's based on my experience doing some businesses, doing this policy reform in Georgia, and also helping now with many different countries in this particular reform. In other countries, I also see that dealing with taxes, it is not the solution. This is one of them, but it's not enough. And that's why we decided, okay, we need to also work on doing business reform. And doing business reform is working on licenses, business registration, first of all, and then licenses and permits and all these many different stuff, which is in many cases a huge burden for the businesses. And in many cases, in many cases in Georgia, that was also the experience that business was not started and that was already taxed, right? So like it's not just this is just an idea and that's already taxed while paying these licenses and permits and registration fees, etc. So we decided to also squeeze or bulldozing this as much as possible. So the idea was that then there was a huge also debates and discussions in Georgia, like guillotine methodology we should take or another methodology. And then we decided to move on with the methodology, we call it 0+, which means like we adopted a new law in which we describe the licenses that is just supposed to be enforced. And we said by this law that all other licenses and permits, whatever was created during the history, it doesn't matter what, are abolished. So that particular approach is really very important, because when we started, for example, making the inventory of those licenses and permits, we just lost. Because when we prepared something like, list of those licenses, 100 or something, 200, then we found out that there are 300 more. And then when we made this inventory further, the new licenses was adopted by different bureaucratic institutions. And another issue also related to this is bureaucracy, which is also a very important element, but I will talk about that a little bit later. Another one is this service hall, which was very important solution at that time. Although I think that if right now I'm managing and dealing with my own consulting company, and when we are talking about reforms in Georgia, I also invite some people visiting Tbilisi, because in many cases that's usually it seems like I'm talking about some kind of fairy tale, but when they are visiting and they see how that is in operations, they realize what we are talking about. Then this particular one, public service hall, is also a very important element to see how this intergovernmental cooperation is realized in a practical way. So that it's which covers many different areas, like public registry for property registration. This is civil registry for the citizens. That's also many other different public services that are provided in one place and on a really very efficient way. For example, registration of vehicle takes 15 minutes. Right away. You go there, you have the documents, that's it. So 15 minutes. The registration of business takes maximum 1 hour. Even maximum, because if you want to do that faster, you can do that even faster if you pay for some higher fee. Getting passport, getting any document that you need. So this particular one is one of the also very important achievement, because people, when they were witnessing these reforms, initially we are skeptical, because they thought that, come on, we don't trust government. We know that it is some kind of, some trap. And then they just, started benefiting this kind of easy services, and that became more and more important for them. The society became the partner in this process, if we just, after this particular one. So doing business reform. So this is the World Bank data. So World Bank data, what that shows that Georgia was standing somewhere above 100s in 2004 or 2006. In 2020, then they that World Bank decided to just reshape it, change it. But in 2020 we were standing somewhere at 7. So, and in some areas, dealing with construction permits, starting a business, paying, in some areas we were just standing somewhere in the first place or the second place. So that also shows that some reforms are easy to pursue and some reforms are a little bit difficult. For example, that also shows that reforms in starting a business, dealing with construction permits, dealing with some licenses, it's easy. It's just decision. And then that's kind of, you see that, in 2007, decision was made in 2008, we were already somewhere, really, in good position, good standing. So corruption. That's how I started. I started that, Georgia was being considered as one of the most corrupted countries in the region. And you see, this is data of the World Bank as well. Corruption Perception Index, the World Bank and Transparency International, they are doing together. And then you see that 2002, yellow line is Georgia. 2002, we are standing like, the poorest and the most corrupted country. And in 2021, right away in 2007, Georgia was already champion, like least corrupted country, comparing to the regional kind of players. Like, you see Albania, like Balkans, Caucasus, Central Asia. And these are countries that we are like, in that particular case comparing. But, this also very important to see that even after the changes in the power, like, new political party came into power, but they did not change fundamental stuff which was created in 2004, 2008, which is very important to talk about. A little bit about obstacles and barriers during this process. First one is a bureaucracy, of course. Yeah, first is bureaucracy, of course. Because when you start talking about something, then of course that is like skepticism comes from the bureaucracy. No, that will not happen, that will not work, that will damage the situation, we will collect less, because now we are collecting now 13%, we will collect 10%, that is just, damaging with everything. So the second is institutional capacity, because there is also lack of capacity. Political instability, of course, mistrust from the public and potential partners, and especially from business community, because business community they are just, the most careful about those reforms, and there is a huge communication is needed. Regional conflicts, we had those especially in Georgia, and external pressure. So what we have learned so far is that these accomplishments are doable first, if there is the consistency, if there is a vision, and there is the clear clarity in this process. And those taxes are paid, and competitive tax environment is created, reducing corruption in all levels was achieved, and promoting a sustainable business climate also was there. But what was still remaining? And in Georgia, that particular one is still, it does mean that, we created a paradise, of course. This is still way ahead. And first of all, judiciary and rule of law. And we had a lot of kind of issues related to that. How we can increase judiciary independence on one hand, and then, of course, the capacity of judiciary and rule of law. Then structural unemployment gaps in human capital, because what we have inherited, those industries are absolutely outdated. Now global economy is driving up absolutely differently. So we need to catch up all the time, and therefore we need to spend and invest in human capital, and also to pay attention to structural unemployment. And economic diversification and reforming SOEs. We just get rid of many SOEs, privatize them, and what we did is that by this privatization proceeds, we just reduced the government debt. So that, that was really very good move towards that, because we just reduced government debt really very, very efficiently. But still, there are some large SOEs still remain, and that needs further restructurization and maybe also privatization. Yeah, that's it. The general description of my presentation, and more than happy to answer your questions if you have some. We can just go deeper to discuss particular elements, or we can talk about overall political economy side, or we can talk about politics if there are some. Thank you.